Section 2 of The Shadows. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Catherine Eastman, November 2007. The Shadows, by George MacDonald, Section 2. Feeling quite strong, the king rose and walked about amongst them, wrapped in his ermine robe, with his red crown on his head, and his diamond sceptre in his hand. Every group of shadows to which he drew near ceased talking as soon as they saw him approach, but at a nod they went on again directly, conversing and relating and commenting, as if no one was there of other kind or of higher rank than themselves. So the king heard a good many stories. At some of them he laughed, and at some of them he cried. But if the stories that the shadows told were printed, they would make a book that no publisher could produce fast enough to satisfy the buyers. I will record some of the things that the king heard, for he told them to me soon after. In fact, I was for some time his private secretary. "I made him confess before a week was over," said a gloomy old shadow.
"But what was the good of that?"
rejoined a pert young one.
"That could not undo what was done."
"Yes, it could."
"What? Bring the dead back to life?"
"No, but comfort the murderer. I could not bear to see the pitiable misery he was in. He was far happier with the rope around his neck than he was with the purse in his pocket. I saved him from killing himself, too."
"How did you make him confess?"
"Only by wallowing on the wall a little."
"How could that make him tell?"
"He knows."
The shadow was silent, and the king turned to another, who was preparing to speak.
"I made a fashionable mother repent."
"How?" broke from several voices, in whose sound was mingled a touch of incredulity.
"Only by making a little coffin on the wall,"
was the reply.
"Did the fashionable mother confess too?" "She had nothing more to confess than everybody knew." "What did everybody know, then?" "That she might have been kissing a living child when she followed a dead one to the grave. The next will fare better."
"I put a stop to a wedding," said another.
"Horrid shade!"
remarked a poetic imp.
"How?" said others. "Tell us how."
"Only by throwing a darkness, as if from the branch of a sconce, over the forehead of a fair girl. They are not married yet, and I do not think they will be. But I loved the youth who loved her. How he started! It was a revelation to him."
"But did it not deceive him?"
"Quite the contrary."
"But it was only a shadow from the outside, not a shadow coming through from the soul of the girl."
"Yes, you may say so, but it was all that was wanted to make the meaning of her forehead manifest. Yes, of her whole face, which had now and then, in the pauses of his passion, perplexed the youth. All of it, curled nostrils, pouting lips, projecting chin, instantly fell into harmony with that darkness between her eyebrows. The youth understood it in a moment and went home miserable. And they're not married yet."
"I caught a toper alone, over his magnum of port," said a very dark shadow, "and didn't I give it him! I made delirium tremens first, and then I settled into a funeral, passing slowly along the length of the opposite wall. I gave him plenty of plumes and mourning coaches. And then I gave him a funeral service, but I could not manage to make the surplice white, which was all the better for such a sinner. The wretch stared till his face passed from purple to grey, and actually left his 5th glass only unfinished, and took refuge with his wife and children in the drawing-room, much to their surprise. I believe he actually drank a cup of tea, and although I have often looked in since, I have never caught him again, drinking alone at least." "But does he drink less? Have you done him any good?" "I hope so, but I am sorry to say I can't feel sure about it."
"Humph, humph, humph," grunted various shadow throats.
"I had such fun once," cried another. "I made such game of a young clergyman." "You have no right to make game of anyone." "Oh, yes, I have, when it is for his good. He used to study his sermons. Where do you think?" "In his study, of course. Where else should it be?" "Yes and no. Guess again." "Out among the faces in the streets?" "Guess again." "In still green places in the country?" "Guess again." "In old books?" "Guess again." "No, no, tell us." "In the looking-glass, ha ha!" "He was fair game, fair shadow game." "I thought so. And I made such fun of him one night on the wall. He had sense enough to see that it was himself, and very like an ape. So he got ashamed, turned the mirror with its face to the wall, and thought a little more about his people, and a little less about himself. I was very glad, for, please your majesty," and here the speaker turned towards the king, "we don't like the creatures that live in the mirrors. You call them ghosts, don't you?" Before the king could reply, another had commenced. But the story about the clergyman had made the king wish to hear one of the shadow sermons. So he turned him towards a long shadow, who was preaching to a very quiet and listening crowd. He was just concluding his sermon. "Therefore, dear shadows, it is the more needful that we love one another as much as we can, because that is not much. We have no such excuse for not loving as mortals have, for we do not die like them. I suppose it is the thought of that death that makes them hate so much. Then again, we go to sleep all day, most of us, and not in the night as men do. And you know that we forget everything that happened the night before. Therefore, we ought to love well, for the love is short. Ah, dear shadow, whom I love now with all my shadowy soul, I shall not love thee tomorrow eve, I shall not know thee. I shall pass thee in the crowd, and never dream that the shadow whom I now love is near me then. Happy shades! For we only remember our tales until we have told them here, and then they vanish in the shadow churchyard, where we bury only our dead selves. Ah, brethren, who would be a man and remember? Who would be a man and weep? We ought indeed to love one another, for we alone inherit oblivion, we alone are renewed with eternal birth, we alone have no gathered weight of years. I will tell you the awful fate of one shadow who rebelled against his nature, and sought to remember the past. He said, 'I will remember this eve.' He fought with the genial influences of kindly sleep when the sun rose on the awful dead day of light. And although he could not keep quite awake, he dreamed of the foregone eve, and he never forgot his dream. Then he tried